Hello and welcome to The Natural View. I'm Maggie Jacqua. I'm the content director of Whole Foods Magazine, and I'm here with my co-host Todd Paula of 24 Stories Marketing. Hey, Todd.
Hi, Maggie.
Good to see you as always. And today we have a special guest. We have Nathan Jones. He is the CEO of Xlear, and that company is a global leader on creating natural sinus and oral care products that support a healthy lifestyle. And today we're going to dive into a topic that is really been all over the news lately, Nathan. So thank you for joining us and giving us a better handle on the topic of fluoridation. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know you've been really out there spreading awareness and helping to clarify, what really I think is a lot of confusion and also angst, as a parent. My kids are grown now, but I remember when they were little, the pressure with this whole fluoride situation. So this is a really important topic to cover as so much more science and awareness has come to light. But first, let's just talk about tooth decay a little bit. If you can tell us, I was reading on your website about the silent epidemic of tooth decay. So I'm hoping you can just put the issue into perspective for us.
So the whole idea that they've referred to tooth decay and oral disease as the silent epidemic, and this was not done by me. It was our Surgeon General, and in 2000, so almost 25 years ago, a quarter of a century, they wrote the Surgeon General report on oral care and oral hygiene and oral health here in the United States. And what that whole paper was about was pointing out that the state of our oral health was declining even then. And it had been declining for a long enough time period that they thought it was important that they write a Surgeon General report on the topic. And you read through that, I'm trying to remember, it's like 300, I want to say 300 and something pages. And they mentioned drugs, they mentioned tobacco, they mentioned all kinds of things. But one of the things that was hardly ever mentioned in it was sugar, which you would think if they're talking about tooth decay, they're going to mention sugar a couple of times, but they hardly ever did. And we all know that, I shouldn't say we all know because obviously we might not all know that, but sugar is caused by a strep mutans bacteria in our mouth. It is a bacterial infection in our mouth. We've known, and dental professionals, we've known that the tooth decay is a bacterial infection in our mouth. We've known it for 100 years. It was in 1924, so 100 years ago, that they discovered that strep mutans was the bacteria that was responsible for tooth decay. And where that bacteria comes from, or what it does, is it metabolizes 6-carbon sugars, sucrose, glucose, fructose, and even to a lesser extent, the sorbitol, the mannitol, the maltitol, these 6-carbon sugars, alcohols. It doesn't create, this strep mutans bacteria, when it metabolizes sorbitol and the sugar alcohols, it doesn't create as much acid, but it still creates acid, and the bacteria still live and they still thrive on it. But anyway, so it's been 100 years that we've known that. And the way that tooth decay starts is the strep mutans bacteria metabolizes sugar. It breaks down those carbohydrates into energy, and the byproduct, the sugar bug poop is what dentists call it, that's actually acid. That acid is excreted out of the bacteria, and it makes your saliva acidic, and that is what dissolves the enamel of your teeth and causes cavities.
Interesting. So where does fluoride fit into this whole story? Because it seems like forever we've heard about, fluoride fights tooth decay. And can you talk about that notion, and then also what the research shows us? And now what are the concerns with fluoride in terms of, human health and its inability or ability to fight tooth decay? What can you tell us about that?
Well, the interesting part of that, and I'm trying to think of how to say this because I've used it a lot as an example, but fluoride fights tooth decay, but fluoride does not fight the bacterial infection that is strep mutans. Okay. So we're going under the assumption that we believe everything they tell us about fluoride. Okay. Go under that assumption right here. But even the dentists that do this and all the research, what they're looking at is you have a tooth, the acid is dissolving your enamel. So rather than actually go after the bacteria that's creating the acid, all they're doing is saying, let's make your enamel stronger so you don't see the effects of the bacterial infection. And I use this analogy a fair amount when I'm trying to explain this, but if you think of your tooth as a castle sitting on a hill, okay, big stone, castle, and you're inside that castle defending it, you want that castle wall to be strong. And then you have this army of bacteria, and they're sitting there with their catapults and their trebuchets, and they're shooting acid bombs up against your castle. What fluoride does is that's like you sending out a mason to constantly repair that castle wall while ignoring the army of bacteria around your castle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and it seems.
It doesn't make sense. It makes zero sense. It makes so much more sense to actually suppress the invading army of bacteria.
Yeah. Your explanation was expert. Your explanation makes sense, but yeah, the fallacy in how to go about fighting the underroot cause, pardon the pun, is there.
Yes. And so, but that is the way fluoride works. That's the way we're taught that fluoride works. Okay. And there's other things like you're seeing a lot of toothpaste in the natural space that are now, putting all over their packaging hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite is another mineral that helps your teeth to remineralize the same way that fluoride, and it's about as effective as fluoride, which in a everything being equal world, that would actually be great. We actually use a product called trimetaphosphate, which, there's studies out there showing that trimetaphosphate actually helps your teeth remineralize about 36% stronger than what the hydroxyapatite and the fluoride do. But the interplay here, I guess the connection here is none of these things are going to work as long as the strep mutans bacteria are there in your mouth creating the acid. Because all three of these products, in order for them to work, they all work during the remineralization process. And if we aren't allowing our teeth to remineralize, none of them are going to work.
Yeah, so I was going to say, it sounds kind of like the Western medical approach to most things, which is kind of Band-Aid and not actually get to the root cause. So tell us, in a perfect world, what should we be doing? And you have products that help. What would be the right routine to, help really have a good oral care routine?
Well, the very first thing you should do is, utilize a non-hexo sugar. You can use xylitol, which is what we use. There's thousands of studies showing it. Another sugar is erythritol that you can use. That's a 4-carbon sugar. Again, that one will also help. There's more studies with xylitol than there are with erythritol, but erythritol, the studies that are out there look promising. There's other sugars that you can use, and you don't have to use them very long. I mean, if you get off of 6-carbon sugars, you can change the microbiome in your mouth within a couple of months. It's not incredibly difficult to do. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to address the bacterial infection that is strep mutans. And the problem with using antibiotics in your mouth or using a mouthwash that kills 99.9% of the bacteria is even if you have a high incidence of caries, roughly about 15% or less of the bacterial load in your mouth is going to be bacteria that create acid. The other bacteria that live in our mouth are bacteria that help us digest gluten, that help us digest milk, that help us digest a wide variety of other products. And if that's where the bacteria that help us digest these things live, and we're using a mouthwash that kills 99.9% of the bacteria, what are we going to see in our society? We're going to see an increase in people that can't tolerate milk and can't tolerate gluten and can't tolerate other things where the bacteria that help us digest them live in our mouth, and we're sitting there killing them.
So interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I know you offer fluoride-based and fluoride-free options, right? When And I also know there's some research showing xylitol and fluoride working together may be a good option. Can you talk a little bit about that specifically, that combination, and why that would be a favorable option?
Well, I'll go back to that castle on the hill analogy. Okay. And we also use trimetaphosphate. And again, trimetaphosphate, hydroxyapatite, fluorapatite, all of those things, they're achieving the same goal of making your enamel stronger. Okay. But none of them actually address the bacterial infection. That's what xylitol does. And so if you're using xylitol and fluoride, or you're using xylitol and trimetaphosphate, you're actually getting the best of both worlds. You're getting your teeth stronger, and you're getting rid of dealing with the bacterial infection.
And what about nasal spray can come into play here too? Can you tell us about that?
Well, so the hygiene process in your mouth is interconnected with the one in your nose, because if you go into the back of your head, like right back in there, it's all connected. And so our nasal spray, the Xlear nasal spray, it originally came about because my dad, who is a physician, started reading a bunch of papers out of the dental literature where kids that were chewing gum with xylitol in all these dental studies, not only were they not getting tooth decay, but just by chewing gum, they were getting 42% fewer respiratory infections. Again, it's because it's all connected back here. And originally, the researchers thought it was the chewing action, but the kids that were chewing the sorbitol gum, they didn't see the reduction in respiratory infections. The people that were chewing the sugar gum did not see a decrease in respiratory infections. It was just the xylitol. And the reason why is because, and studies were done later showing this, is that what xylitol does, which is unique, is that it actually binds up on the receptor sites and blocks the bacteria, their ability to adhere to the tissue.
Interesting. So can we talk a little bit about the dental or dentist approach to this whole issue of fluoride and non-fluoride products? And are you seeing an evolution in terms of the thinking around from dental professionals about an approach to tooth decay? Because what you've said so far makes a lot of sense in terms of especially the best of both worlds approach and taking care of the castle, right? And then also repairing it. Are you seeing a trend where dentists are following suit with that same sort of thinking, or is there still work to be done there?
I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And the reason why is because you have such a cartel, and I can't think of a better word for it. You have such a cartel of people in the dental industry that I don't know how you would say it. I mean, it's kind of like in the medical industry, you have these guys, and I should say people, you have these people who are so indoctrinated into how safe and effective vaccines are that nobody questions them. You're considered a heretic if you question it. Fluoride has that same status in the dental industry. But that's cracking because, the reason why fluoride's been in the news lately is because there was a court case in California where the Fluoride Action Network was suing, I think it was a city, because they had fluoride in their water, and they pointed out that the negative effects, the damages caused by fluoride in the water, far outweighed the protective benefits. And where that comes from is the Cochrane Group, which is well respected. In case people don't know who it is, the Cochrane Group doesn't do, I'm not going to say they don't do any of their own research, but what they do is they do meta-analysis. They'll go out and they'll look at 100 studies, or they'll go on a topic, find as many studies as they can, and they'll take all those studies and lump them together and see what data comes out of it. Okay? And they came out with a paper where they pointed out and they said that putting fluoride in the water at best reduced tooth decay by 4%. Okay, they looked at all of the studies that they could find over the last 25 years, and what they found was a 4% reduction in tooth decay. Okay, 4% isn't enough to do anything about it. But the question, and as soon as I read this, I sent out an email to a bunch of the people in the dental industry that I work with, dentists, hygienists, people like that. A lot of them support fluoride. A lot of them don't. And I said, why is it that it's 4%? Because the Cochrane Group right here, they're saying it's 4%. If you look at the data points where they originally looked and justified putting fluoride in the water and putting it in the toothpaste and everything, they made the claim that it was 25% reduction, which 25% reduction really is still questionable on my end. I'm questioning, whether it's effective, but it was 25%. So why is it that studies that were done in the 30s and 40s were, 25%, and now in the last 25 years, they're only 4%? And so we had a little discussion in there, and we said it's either, are they using a different kind of fluoride? No, same type of fluoride. Okay, did they lie and fudge the data? I mean, we know that would never happen. That would never happen.
Of course.
But the question is, did it happen as much back then as it did today? And none of the doctors would agree. They all agree that it happens ad nauseum today, but they said, nah, it didn't happen that much that long ago. Well, what's your third option? And the third option is the environment's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we discuss that, everybody's like, oh my gosh, it has. Because if you go back to the 30s and 40s, we as people, we would eat 3 meals a day, or maybe 2. You would have 3 squares. Today, we wake up, we have a very high carbohydrate breakfast. Normally, I'm going on population. We have a very high carbohydrate breakfast. Then after we get to work or school, we have to have a soda or a cup of sugar with a little bit of coffee from Starbucks in it. That's, I think I think Starbucks sells more sugar than they do coffee. And then you have another meal. You have your lunch. Again, a lot of carbohydrates. Then at 3:00, you have to have a snack to tide you over. So you have a candy bar, and then you go home and have dinner. You're not giving your mouth the time to bring itself back to a pH base and allowing that remineralization process to happen. Your mouth is constantly in an acidic state. So, of course, the fluoride's not going to work. The hydroxyapatite wouldn't work. The trimetaphosphate wouldn't work. None of that is going to work unless we get rid of the bacterial infection that is strep mutans.
So the fact that, it's not going to work is one level of concern with the fluoridation, but there's other concerns that have come to light, especially in terms of children. Can you talk through some of what the science shows there?
Well, that is what I'm not familiar with. I have not really paid that much attention to the fluoride argument. Okay. I've never been a huge fan of putting it in the water. Until we had trimetaphosphate, I would use it in a toothpaste because I understand that you're remineralizing your enamel. The trimetaphosphate works better than the fluoride. So that's what we use. We have fluoride in our toothpaste simply because if you go into a dental conference and you're talking to the dentist and you don't have any products that have fluoride, you're not going to get anyone because they're still that entrenched.
Yeah, and that's what I was reading. The Wall Street Journal just had an article addressing fluoride, talking about the suit, and that was just actually last weekend, so it's getting out more mainstream. But in reading about that, I was also, reading a dentist's report on it, and he was talking about how they're basically been indoctrinated in, their training, that this is the way, that's it, period. So things are coming to light.
Yeah. I mean, it's absurd that all of the brainiacs, the smart people in the dental industry, that in 2000, when, what was his name? I think it was Sanger, Surgeon General, whatever it was, the Surgeon General in 2000, I would have thought that they, in all of the research that they did, would have come up and said, it's because we're grazing, but they never did. They said it was tobacco. They said it was drug use. They said it was all of this and that. They didn't point out that, hey, we're letting school kids run down to the vending machine and buy a Coke between classes now. We're selling candy bars at school. It's not like Archie and Jughead where you had to wait until after school and you could go down to the pharmacy, to the, what do they call it, the drugstore, and get a little soda with a cherry on it or something.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, I would have thought, it makes sense as far as quality of diet and what some of those snacks are, but it's surprising to me to hear about the frequency. I mean, now that you explain it, it makes sense as far as letting your mouth reset and the pH balance reset in your mouth, but the frequency of eating even has something to do with it. And the fact that, for the past several years, it feels like decades, there have been a lot of people promoting that, like not eating big meals, just like, smaller meals, a lot of fitness experts, right? So interesting to hear that perspective. And it makes sense if you think about your mouth as being this.
I mean, well, you touched on it. It is also important what you're eating, because if you're eating jerky or a handful of nuts or something else that there aren't carbs, that there aren't any 6-carbon sugars in, then that's going to affect it also.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the strep mutans bacteria, that it's strep mutans. Mutans means mutant. It's a mutant bacteria that adapted, became a mutant, and because it's a mutant, that's why it's creating the acid. If you go back 300 years, prior to when we started refining sugar, on large scale, and we were eating a diet that was more protein and fat-based than it was carbohydrate-based, we didn't have as much tooth decay. Okay? When we started eating and putting and adding sugar to everything we had, you started having this strep bacteria that mutated, because with all of these readily available carbohydrates that we were adding into our diet, they didn't have to metabolize the sugars that were there. They didn't have to metabolize them as effectively or efficiently. I'm trying to think of the word effectively, where they got all the energy. They just took the easy energy and spit the rest out, which was the acid.
Interesting. So yeah, so the big
if you think of it, if you go look at go get a cheap car, like, none of the cars that we have here in the world today are cheap. So we'll go with a Yugo. Are you guys old enough to remember Yugos?
Oh yeah.
Okay. But if you get a Yugo, if you ever followed one of them, they were belching smoke everywhere, right? It's because they weren't burning the gas efficiently. You drive around behind a Cadillac or a BMW or a Lexus, and the engines are built well enough that they're efficiently burning the fuel. And what you should see is water dripping out of your exhaust pipe. Because if it's burning it completely efficiently, it's just water.
All right. I love your analogy. So don't be a Yugo, everybody out there. The lifestyle.
It's just good life. The strep mutans are the Yugo, because if it's cheap, why do they go? Why do you want to burn it efficiently? Just use more and burn it cheap.
All right. So anything else that we haven't touched on that any points you want to drive home for our viewers?
I would actually like to emphasize, like really drive home the importance of hygiene, personal hygiene, brushing our teeth, washing our nose, washing our hands, stuff like that, especially in light of the last 4 years, because hygiene has really done more to solve epidemics, prevent epidemics, pandemics, than any pharmaceutical intervention in the history of mankind. I mean, we can sit there, just think of all of the epidemics and pandemics that have ever happened, and name me one of them that was solved by a vaccine. None. Name me one that was solved by a pharmaceutical product. None. Every single one of them that was solved by human intervention was solved by improvements in hygiene and sanitation.
Well, there's something to be said there about just the beauty of how we're all built, and how, this natural thing, just simply, whatever, washing your hands, brush your teeth, whatever it is, goes to prevent all this. It goes back to the fact that we're these amazingly engineered, machines. And if we pay attention to some of those mechanisms and use them, and not skip to the Band-Aid, as you said earlier, Maggie, but really pay attention to how you keep things strong naturally, that it works wonders.
Yeah, no, and that's the truth. But we are indoctrinated We just finished talking about how the doctors were indoctrinated, to believe in vaccines, and how the dental professionals are indoctrinated to believe in fluoride. We as a civilization, we are indoctrinated to believe that the doctors and the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that really, truly have improved our standard of living over the last 150 years. But that is 100%, now, again, not true. If you go back, and I refer to this as the golden age of public health, but from about 1870 to 1945, 1960, in that area, you saw all of these diseases just plummeting. You saw cholera, mumps, all of these things just declining. What was the cause of that? They were all declining before any of these vaccines were put on the market. It was because we were getting clean water piped to our house. It's because we were getting sewage taken away. It's because they had trash guys coming around and picking up the trash and hauling it away and burying it. Okay? That is what increased our longevity. That's what increased our lifespan. That's what increased all of them. It wasn't the pharmaceutical products. It wasn't the drugs. It wasn't the vaccines. They like to take credit for it, but it wasn't that. And if you really want to look at it, if you put it on a graph over time, all of these illnesses were plummeting as we got the water and the clean, the hygiene and sanitation, as hygienists were educating us and talking to us about, hygiene and being healthy. I'm old enough, I don't know if you're old enough, but when we were kids, they used to have hygienists come into the school every semester, and they'd give you those little pink pills and tell you to chew them, and they'd look for the pink stuff. Do you remember that?
I do.
They don't do that anymore.
I don't feel great about every reference where you're like, I don't know if you're old enough. I'm like, well, I'm absolutely able to. But still, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. But they don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
If you have kids, they're not going to have that experience.
Right.
Okay? They're expecting that we are teaching all of that stuff to our kids, and we're not.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you have this increase. But up until about 1980, 85, our standard of living was increasing, our longevity and all that. After 80, right around in that time frame, it's actually been going down again. Our longevity is going down, our standard of living, we have more illnesses, we have all of these other issues. We have the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical. If they were truly the ones that were driving this to go down, it would still be going down. It's not.
Yeah, interesting.
So what I want to make sure of is that people understand the importance of hygiene and sanitation. The vast majority, and by the vast majority, I mean probably close to 99.9% of the time you get sick with a communicable disease that's not an STD, but most of the time that you get sick, it's going to be because a pathogen entered in through your nose and your mouth. And if you're taking care of that, of your mouth and your nose, and it's healthy, you have defenses in there that are going to stop that infection from happening.
Excellent. And we have the tools to do it. And, people should definitely check out your website, see what you guys are offering, and learn more.
Yeah. And I encourage people, don't take my word for it. Go out and read the studies. Logically, it makes sense. If a bacteria or virus is going in your nose, put something in your snot that's going to bind up on that and not allow it to adhere to your tissue. We know that xylitol does that. Okay, we know that it does it to RSV, to H1N1, SARS-CoV-2, a wide variety. We know there's some that it doesn't. We know that we've known since 1998 that it does the same thing to a bunch of bacteria. We know the same thing is going on in your mouth. So if you keep your mouth and your nose healthy, they're going to stop a lot of those, those illnesses from happening. And just to prove the point there, real quick, in 2020, there was a paper that came out of Israel and another one that came out of Canada where they pointed out that people who had periodontal disease, which is just, periodontal disease is just a catch-all for inflammation in your mouth, and it's easily treatable. Just brush your teeth. But they actually had papers come out where they showed that if people had periodontal disease, they were 8 times not 8%, 8 times more likely to be hospitalized and die if they had COVID.
Jeez.
But did you ever hear that? Did you ever hear Vivek Murthy come out and say, hey, brush your teeth, people?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But yeah, anything underscores your hygiene point, it's that.
Exactly. But that's what I want to make the point of, is that hygiene, personal hygiene, public sanitation are far more important than what we give them credit for, and definitely far more important than what our public health and our medical establishment give them credit for.
All right. Well, Nathan, thank you. Thank you for joining us, filling us in on all of this. And any new developments, we love to share in Whole Foods Magazine. So keep us posted on any, new science that comes out that you think we need to know about. We always love to let people know about the latest. So thank you for joining us.